The air that drifted through the open windows of my beat-up Ford Ranger always changed about 10 miles from the lake. The city's exhaust-tinged breath would finally give way to the clean, sharp scent of pine and damp earth. It was a perfume of peace, a signal to my soul that the concrete labyrinth was behind me and my sanctuary was ahead. This particular Saturday in late August was no different. The sun was warm on my arm. My favorite worn-out flannel was in the passenger seat for the cooler evening to come, and a thermos of still hot coffee sat in the cup holder. It was, by all accounts, a perfect day. The sanctuary was Lot 74, a 5-acre slice of heaven on the quieter, western shore of Miller's Lake. It wasn't much to look at for most people, just a swath of towering pines, a gentle slope down to 100 feet of private, pebbly shoreline, and a small, cleared meadow where a cabin was supposed to be. To me, it was everything. It was my grandfather's legacy, a piece of land he'd bought with his army pension and spent every summer on, first in a tent, then a tiny trailer. He'd left it to me with a handwritten note that said, "Find your peace here, Alex. It's good for it." For the past 4 years since his passing, that's exactly what I'd been doing. I hadn't had the money to build the small, sustainable cabin I dreamed of yet. My job as a graphic designer in the city paid the bills and was slowly feeding a cabin fund savings account, but lumber prices and contractors were a different league. So, for now, I was a steward of the land. I'd come up at least 2 weekends a month to clear brush, walk the property lines, and sit on the fallen log that served as my porch, watching the sun set over the water. It was a ritual of reclamation, a way of keeping the dream alive and my grandfather's memory close. I turned off the county highway onto the gravel access road, the tires crunching a familiar rhythm. Another mile, and I'd be there. I took a sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through my chest, a perfect counterpoint to the cool breeze. I was already picturing my afternoon, checking the trail camera I'd set up near the creek, maybe doing a little fishing from the shore, and then just sitting, listening to the world breathe. The entrance to my lot was marked by 2 mossy stone pillars my grandfather had built by hand. As I made the turn, my brain registered something that didn't belong. It was a flash of sterile, clinical white against the deep greens and browns of the forest. My foot eased off the accelerator. The Ranger slowed to a crawl. And there, sitting squarely in the middle of my building meadow, was a recreational vehicle. It wasn't just any RV. It was a behemoth, a land yacht of obscene proportions, probably 40 feet long, gleaming under the afternoon sun like a beached whale. It was brand new, the kind of machine with multiple slide-outs, a satellite dish already aimed at the heavens, and graphics that looked like a drunken swoosh had attacked the side. My first thought was simple, unadulterated confusion. Had I taken a wrong turn? I hadn't. The stone pillars were mine. The ancient, gnarled oak with the broken limb was mine. This was Lot 74. Maybe someone was lost. Broken down? It seemed unlikely. The RV wasn't just parked. It was settled. The main slide-out was extended, humming with a quiet electrical whir. A pristine green astroturf mat was laid out by the door, upon which sat 2 ridiculously comfortable-looking reclining camp chairs. A small, yapping dog of the fluffy white variety was tied to one of the chairs, its leash taut as it strained against its collar, barking at my truck. I parked the Ranger on the edge of the meadow, the engine's rumble dying to a tick. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring. It felt like finding a spaceship in your backyard. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Who parks a small house on someone else's private property? The door to the RV swung open, and a woman emerged, shielding her eyes against the sun with a perfectly manicured hand. She was in her late 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could withstand a hurricane, and was dressed in expensive-looking yoga pants and a matching zip-up jacket. She had the kind of face that was perpetually arranged in a mask of mild disapproval. She looked at my truck, then at me, as if I were the one who was out of place. I swung my door open and stepped out, holding up a hand in what I hoped was a friendly, non-threatening gesture. "Hi there," I said, walking slowly towards her. Bit of a surprise finding this here. The woman did not smile. She placed her hands on her hips, a posture of immediate and unshakable authority. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carrying a clipped, imperious tone. The little white dog yapped in furious agreement. "I think maybe I can help you," I replied, keeping my voice even. "I'm Alex, I own this lot." I think you might have taken a wrong turn. The state park is about 5 miles down the road. She scoffed, a little puff of air that dismissed my entire existence. I'm not lost, she said, as if it were the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard. I know exactly where I am. And you don't own this lot. I blinked. My grandfather's words, the deed in my safe deposit box, the property taxes I paid every year, all of it seemed to flicker in the face of this woman's absolute certainty. I'm sorry, I said, a little laugh escaping my lips out of sheer bewilderment. I'm quite sure I do. My grandfather left it to me. Well, your grandfather must have sold it, she snapped. Because this is common property now. The HOA president gave me express permission to park here. The letters hung in the air between us. HOA. It was a term I associated with sterile suburban subdivisions and endless rules about lawn height and mailbox colors. Not with the rustic, independent properties dotted around Miller's Lake. I was suddenly unmoored. An HOA? Here? There's no HOA for this lot, I stated, though a seed of doubt had been planted. Was it possible? Some new development I was unaware of? The woman let out a long, suffering sigh, as if explaining basic physics to a toddler. There is a Lake Miller Homeowners Association. I am on the board, and the president, Mr. Henderson, told me I could use this overflow space. So if you don't mind, my husband and I are enjoying a little peace and quiet. She gestured vaguely at my truck. Your vehicle is rather loud. This was insane. It was like stepping into an alternate reality where my sanctuary was a community parking lot, and this imperious woman was the gatekeeper. I took a deep breath, the scent of pine now tinged with the faint, unpleasant smell of the RV's generator. Look, I said, trying one last time for reason. My name is Alex Petrov. This is my property, Lot 74. I have the deed. I pay the taxes. There's been a misunderstanding. I've never heard of an HOA having jurisdiction here. I'm going to have to ask you to please pack up and leave. Her face hardened, the mask of disapproval solidifying into one of outright hostility. I'm not going anywhere. I have permission. You are the one who is trespassing. Now, I'm going to ask you to leave my campsite before I call the sheriff. She turned on her heel, the picture of righteous indignation, and disappeared back into the gleaming white fortress, slamming the door behind her. The little dog gave one final, triumphant yap. I was left standing in the middle of my own property, feeling like an intruder, the perfect day now shattered into a million confusing pieces. The battle for Lot 74 had just begun, and I had a sinking feeling my opponent was a professional. My first move was a tactical retreat. Arguing with a brick wall is a fool's errand, and this woman was a fortress of self-righteous certainty. I got back in my Ranger and drove, not away, but deeper into the collection of lots and cabins that ringed the lake. I had to find out if this HOA was a figment of her imagination or a genuine, bureaucratic monster I was somehow tangled up with. My grandfather had known most of the original property owners, people who, like him, had bought their plots decades ago for a song. Their cabins were modest, well-loved, and blended into the landscape. But in recent years, some of the lots had been sold, and new, much larger houses had sprung up. These were the multi-story cabins, with more glass than wood, with manicured lawns that ran right down to the water's edge and boat lifts that looked like industrial machinery. It was from one of these newer McMansions that the HOA threat likely emanated. I remembered a name my grandfather had mentioned, a man who was one of the old-timers, Henderson, George Henderson, the name the woman in the RV, my trespasser, had invoked. According to my grandfather, Henderson was a retired history professor who had been coming to the lake since he was a boy. He lived in a modest A-frame 3 lots down from mine. If anyone knew what was going on, it would be him. I found his place easily. A simple wooden sign with the Hendersons carved into it hung by the driveway. A sensible Subaru was parked near the house. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney. It was a picture of lakeside tranquility, a world away from the gleaming behemoth currently squatting on my land. I knocked on the solid wood door, and a moment later it was opened by a man in his early 70s with a kind, craggy face, a thick head of white hair, and intelligent eyes behind a pair of reading glasses. He wore a cardigan and held a book, his finger marking his place. "Mr. Henderson?" I asked. "That's me," he said with a warm, slightly quizzical smile. "And you are?" "My name is Alex Petrov. My grandfather was Michael Petrov." He owned Lot 74. Recognition dawned in his eyes. Michael's boy. Of course, I remember him talking about you. It's good to meet you, Alex. Please, come in. I stepped inside a cozy living room filled with books, the scent of wood smoke, and the comfortable clutter of a life well lived. He offered me a seat in a worn leather armchair. I wish I were here under better circumstances. I began, and proceeded to recount the entire bizarre encounter. I described the RV, the yapping dog, the astroturf mat, and the immovable woman with the helmet of blonde hair. As I spoke, Mr. Henderson's warm smile slowly faded, replaced by a look of weary resignation. He pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed. That would be Brenda, he said, the name sounding like a curse. Brenda Donaldson. And I am so sorry, my boy. She has twisted my words into a pretzel. He went on to explain. The Lake Miller Homeowners Association did, in fact, exist. It had been formed about 10 years ago, primarily by the newer residents. At first, it was a voluntary neighborhood association, its sole purpose to pool funds to pay for grading the gravel road and maintaining the small, shared boat ramp at the end of the point. My grandfather, a pragmatist, had paid the $100 annual dues. Cheaper than a new axle, he'd grumbled, and left it at that. As his heir, I had continued to pay them, seeing it as a necessary, if slightly annoying, expense. But in the last 2 years, things had changed. A new wave of residents, people who brought their city sensibilities and love of regulation with them, had taken over the board. Brenda Donaldson was the newest and most active member. She treats the HOA bylaws like they're the 10 Commandments, and she's Moses coming down the mountain, Mr. Henderson explained, a wry grimace on his face. She's tried to institute rules about everything from the color you can paint your cabin to what kind of flowers you can plant. Then he got to the heart of the matter. Brenda's driveway at her massive new lake house was being repaved, a 2-day job. She had called him, as HOA president, in a panic, asking where she could park her monstrous RV. I told her, he said, leaning forward, his eyes earnest, that she could temporarily park it in the gravel lot by the community boat ramp. For the weekend. It's an oversized lot. Nobody uses it much this time of year. I never mentioned your property. I wouldn't dream of it. She must have seen your empty meadow and decided it was a scenic upgrade. The woman's sense of entitlement is a force of nature. The relief that washed over me was immense. I wasn't crazy. My property hadn't been secretly absorbed into some communal collective. This was a simple, albeit maddening, case of one person's colossal arrogance. So what do? I asked. She's claiming you gave her permission and refuses to move. Mr. Henderson stood up and walked over to a roll-top desk. He shuffled through some papers and pulled out a slim booklet. Our saving grace, he said, handing it to me. The official HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Brenda's favorite bedtime reading. I suggest you read Article 4, Section 3B. I flipped to the page. The language was dry, legalese, but the meaning was crystal clear. No temporary structures, including but not limited to tents, trailers, recreational vehicles, or shacks, shall be used on any lot at any time as a residence, either temporarily or permanently. It was a slam dunk. The very document she was using as her shield was, in fact, a sword I could use against her. There's also the matter of common sense and basic decency, Mr. Henderson added with a sad smile. But those aren't in the bylaws, I'm afraid. Look, Alex, I will call her myself and tell her in no uncertain terms that she misunderstood me and that she is trespassing. But I'll be honest with you. Brenda doesn't respond well to being told she's wrong. It's like a personal affront to her. I appreciate that more than you know, Mr. Henderson, I said, feeling a surge of gratitude. I wasn't alone in this fight. He walked me to the door. Your grandfather was a good man, Alex. He loved this land. He wouldn't have stood for this, and neither should you. If she gives you any more trouble, you let me know. The rest of the board may be intimidated by her, but I'm too old to be scared of a bully. Armed with the HOA bylaws and the truth, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I drove back to my lot, the righteous anger simmering. Phase 1, reconnaissance, was complete. Phase 2, the confrontation, was about to begin. The sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the meadow. The RV was still there, a white scar on the landscape. A man, presumably Mr. Donaldson, was now sitting in one of the camp chairs, reading a newspaper. He was a small, balding man who seemed to shrink in the presence of his wife's monstrous vehicle. I parked again, this time with more authority, and strode across the grass, the HOA booklet in my hand like a holy text. Brenda emerged from the RV as I approached, her arms already crossed. She had a phone in her hand. "I thought I told you to leave," she said, her voice sharp. "And I told you this is my property," I retorted, my voice firm. "I just had a very interesting chat with Mr. Henderson." At the mention of the name, a flicker of something, annoyance, fear, crossed her face before being replaced by her usual mask of indignation. "George is a dear, but he's getting a bit forgetful in his old age." "He seemed perfectly sharp to me," I said coolly. "Sharp enough to remember telling you to park at the boat ramp, not on my private land." He also reminded me of this. I held up the booklet. Article 4, Section 3B. No RVs to be used as a residence on any lot. Your own rules, Brenda. You're in violation. The man in the chair rustled his newspaper, pointedly not looking at us. Brenda's face flushed a blotchy red. "That's for permanent residents. This is a temporary situation. An emergency. The bylaws allow for variances in emergency situations. Is your driveway being repaved a life-threatening emergency?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a minor inconvenience you've decided to make my major problem. This is over. I want you to pack up this circus and be off my property in 1 hour." That was when she played her next card. The victim card. Her eyes welled up with crocodile tears. Her voice trembled with manufactured outrage. "I can't believe this," she wailed, loud enough for anyone within a half-mile radius to hear. "This young man is harassing me. A helpless woman. Kicking me out of my home. Where am I supposed to go?" "You can go to the boat ramp, where you were supposed to be in the first place," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Or a hotel. Or the state park. You have a 40-foot house on wheels. You have options. This is not one of them." She pointed her phone at me, her finger jabbing at the screen. "I am recording this. This harassment. I have friends on the board, you know. I will see to it that you are fined for this. You'll never be allowed to build on this land. I'll make sure of it. I will tie you up in so much red tape you'll wish you'd never heard of Miller's Lake." Her husband finally folded his newspaper. "Now, Brenda," he began, his voice weak. "Stay out of this, Harold," she shrieked, not taking her eyes off me. The threats, the sheer, unadulterated venom in her voice, solidified my resolve. The time for politeness was over. She wasn't just a trespasser. She was a bully, used to getting her way by screaming louder and being more unreasonable than anyone else. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. "Find your peace here." There would be no peace with this woman as my neighbor, temporary or otherwise. 1 hour, Brenda," I said, my voice low and cold. "Then I'm calling the sheriff and a tow truck." I turned and walked away, her stream of threats and insults following me like a toxic cloud. I sat in my truck, the engine off, and watched the hour hand on my watch slowly, painstakingly move. It was the longest hour of my life. The hour passed in a tense, silent standoff. I sat in my truck, watching. Brenda and Harold bustled in and out of the RV, but they weren't packing. They were reinforcing their position. They brought out a portable grill. They set up a small folding table. It was a clear, defiant message. "We're not going anywhere." My hand was shaking slightly as I dialed 911. I'd never had to call the police for anything more serious than a fender bender. Giving my name and location, I explained the situation to the dispatcher in a calm, measured voice. "Yes, a trespassing issue. The property owner has asked them to leave, and they've refused." "Yes, I'm the property owner." It felt surreal, like I was describing a scene from a movie. While I waited, I made a second call, this one to a heavy-duty towing company based in the nearest town. I explained the situation and the size of the vehicle. 40-foot Class A, the man on the phone whistled. "Yeah, that's a big boy. We can handle it, but it ain't cheap." "You the property owner?" "You got proof." "I have my deed on my phone, and the sheriff is on his way," I replied. "Good enough for me. We'll dispatch a truck, but the sheriff's got to sign off before we hook up. Be there in about 45. The waiting was agonizing. The sun dipped lower, and the air began to cool. I pulled on my flannel. Harold was now attempting to light the grill, a pathetic plume of smoke rising into the pristine air. Brenda was on her phone, pacing back and forth on her patch of astroturf, her voice a low, angry buzz. She was likely calling her allies on the HOA board, spinning her tale of woe and persecution. Finally, a county sheriff's cruiser came crunching down the gravel road. A deputy stepped out, a tall, sturdy man with a calm demeanor and an air of quiet authority that was immediately reassuring. His name tag read Sutton. I met him halfway, my phone in hand with a digital copy of my property deed ready. I explained the whole story, from my arrival to my conversations with Brenda and Mr. Henderson. I showed him the HOA bylaw. Deputy Sutton listened patiently, nodding. Happens more than you'd think, he said with a sigh. He then walked over to the RV. I stayed back by my truck, giving him space. I could see him talking to Brenda, who was gesturing wildly, her voice rising in pitch. Harold had abandoned the grill and was hovering nervously in the background. The conversation went on for about 10 minutes. At one point, Brenda shoved her phone in the deputy's face. He didn't even look at it. He just stood there, his hands on his hips, a rock of impassive professionalism against her waves of hysteria. Finally, he walked back over to me. Well, she's not going to make this easy, he said, his expression unreadable. She's claiming she has a verbal contract with the HOA president to be here. I explained to her that even if that were true, which he has apparently denied, a verbal contract with a third party doesn't give her the right to trespass on your land. This is a civil matter, but it's happening on your property, so it's also a trespassing issue. You've given her notice to leave, and she has refused. At this point, you are well within your rights to have the vehicle removed at her expense. He looked me in the eye. Are you sure you want to do this? Once that tow truck hooks up, it's going to get messy and expensive for her. I thought of my grandfather. I thought of the peace and quiet I came here to find. I thought of the years of hard work ahead to build my cabin. And I thought of the bullying threats she'd made. I'm sure, I said, my voice steady. She left me no choice. He nodded. Okay then. Right on cue, the tow truck appeared at the turnoff to my lot. It was a monster, a bright red beast of a machine that made my Ranger look like a toy. The name, Big Mike's Towing, was emblazoned on the side. The driver, a burly man with a thick beard and a no-nonsense expression, got out and conferred with Deputy Sutton, who pointed towards the RV. The side of the tow truck seemed to finally break through Brenda's wall of denial. The reality of the situation was here, and it had a 10-ton winch. She let out a sound somewhere between a shriek and a sob. You can't do this, she screamed, her voice cracking. This is our home. She ran towards the front of the RV, positioning herself directly in the path of the tow truck driver as he began to back his rig into position. Deputy Sutton's calm demeanor vanished, replaced by a firm command. Ma'am, you need to step away from the vehicle. Now. No. You'll have to run me over, she cried, throwing her arms out wide in a theatrical gesture of defiance. Harold just wrung his hands, looking utterly miserable. Ma'am, if you don't move, I will have to arrest you for obstruction, the deputy said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The tow truck driver, Big Mike himself, I presumed, was unfazed. He expertly maneuvered his truck, the reverse beeper a deafening counterpoint to Brenda's shrieks. The process was slow and methodical. He positioned his truck, the hydraulics hissing as he lowered the massive boom. Brenda, seeing her human shield tactic was failing, escalated. She threw herself onto the hood of the RV, clinging to the windshield wipers like a shipwreck survivor. That was the last straw for Deputy Sutton. He strode over, firmly took her by the arm, and said, Ma'am, you're under arrest. He swiftly and professionally cuffed her hands behind her back as she unleashed a torrent of abuse and accusations. Harold, finally jolted into action, pleaded, Brenda, for goodness sake, just stop. She ignored him, still screaming as Deputy Sutton led her to his cruiser and placed her in the back. It was a shocking, ugly scene. The serene quiet of my lakeside lot had been shattered by the screech of hydraulics, the beeping of a truck, and the ravings of a woman whose entitlement had finally collided with the immovable object of the law. With Brenda temporarily neutralized, the towing process began in earnest. Big Mike was an artist. He connected the heavy chains to the RV's chassis with loud, definitive clinks of metal. He checked and double-checked the connections. Harold, looking pale and defeated, was instructed to put the RV in neutral and release the parking brake from inside. Slowly, with a groan of protesting tires and straining metal, the land yacht began to move. It was dragged, inch by inch, off my meadow, leaving two deep ruts in the soft earth. I watched it go, a strange mix of relief and disgust washing over me. Relief that the ordeal was finally ending. Disgust that it had ever come to this. As the tow truck pulled the RV onto the gravel road, Deputy Sutton came back over to me. She'll be taken to the station and booked for trespassing and obstruction. She can make bail tonight. The RV will be taken to an impound lot. She'll be responsible for the tow fee and any storage fees to get it back. He handed me a card with a case number on it. You did the right thing. Some people just need to learn the hard way. He got in his cruiser and followed the tow truck down the road, his lights flashing, leaving me alone in the sudden, ringing silence. The only remnants of the occupation were the two deep ruts in my meadow, the sad-looking portable grill, and a single, abandoned reclining camp chair. The sanctuary was mine again, but it felt scarred. The peace I came here to find had been won in a battle I never wanted to fight. In the days that followed, the story of what I came to call the Battle of Lot 74 spread through the lakeside community like wildfire. It turned out Brenda's meltdown had been witnessed by a few neighbors, and her arrest was the talk of the town. My initial fear of being seen as the bad guy, the heartless young man who had a woman arrested, quickly evaporated. The opposite happened. Mr. Henderson called me the next day. Alex, I heard what happened. I'm proud of you for standing your ground. Frankly, this has been a long time coming with Brenda. He informed me that he had called an emergency meeting of the HOA board. The aftermath for Brenda was a cascade of consequences, each one a direct result of her own actions. The first hit was financial, and it was substantial. Big Mike's towing was not cheap. The fee for towing a 40-foot Class A RV, especially on an emergency basis, was well over $1,000. Then came the impound lot fees, which were charged daily. I later learned from Mr. Henderson that the RV sat in the lot for 3 days before Brenda and Harold could arrange to get it out, adding several hundred more dollars to the bill. Then there were the legal fines. She had to post bail to get out of jail the night of her arrest. She was formally charged with misdemeanor trespassing and resisting/obstructing an officer. While a good lawyer would likely get the charges pleaded down to a simple fine, the legal fees alone would be significant. It was a steep price to pay for a few days of stolen scenery. But the most satisfying consequence, for me and for many of the other residents, came from the HOA itself. At the emergency board meeting, Mr. Henderson laid out the facts. He played a voicemail Brenda had left him after the first time I'd spoken to her, one in which she called him a senile old fool and threatened to have him removed as president. He presented my account of the events, backed up by the official sheriff's report. Several other homeowners, who had remained silent before, came forward with their own stories of Brenda's bullying and her attempts to twist the bylaws to her own benefit. The vote was unanimous. Brenda Donaldson was removed from the HOA board for conduct unbecoming a board member and for actions that exposed the association to potential legal liability. Furthermore, she was officially fined by the HOA, the maximum amount allowed under the bylaws, for the blatant violation of Article 4, Section 3B, the very rule I had quoted to her. The irony was poetic. The fallout on the community Facebook page was equally dramatic. Brenda, ever the victim, had posted a long, rambling diatribe about her horrific ordeal, painting herself as a martyr and me as a villain. But it backfired spectacularly. Mr. Henderson, in a rare social media appearance, posted a calm, factual rebuttal outlining the actual bylaws and the timeline of events. Dozens of residents chimed in, supporting him and me. People shared stories of my grandfather, of his kindness and his love for the land. Brenda's post was buried under an avalanche of community support for the quiet young man who just wanted to enjoy his grandfather's property in peace. In the court of public opinion, the verdict was in. A week after the towing, I drove back up to the lake. It was a different kind of drive. I felt a sense of trepidation, wondering if the lot would feel tainted by the memory of the conflict. But as I made the turn between the two stone pillars, all I felt was a profound sense of peace. The meadow was empty. The oppressive white behemoth was gone. The only signs of the recent drama were the two ruts in the grass, which already seemed to be healing, and the abandoned camp chair, which I promptly folded up and put in the back of my truck to drop at the dump. I walked to the center of the meadow, to the exact spot where the RV had been parked. I stood there for a long time, just breathing. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. A breeze rustled the leaves of the tall trees. A loon called out from the lake, its haunting, beautiful cry echoing across the water. This was it. This was the peace my grandfather had talked about. It wasn't just a passive thing you could find. Sometimes, it was something you had to fight for. The ugly confrontation, the stress, the anger, they had all been necessary to protect this sanctuary. The experience hadn't tainted the land. It had deepened my connection to it. I had defended it. It was truly mine now, not just by deed, but by trial. That evening, I didn't fish or check my trail camera. I just sat on my grandfather's log, my makeshift porch, and watched the sky turn from blue to orange to a deep, velvety purple studded with stars. I thought about the cabin I would one day build right here on this spot. It would be small, with a big porch and lots of windows to let the light in. It would be a place of quiet creation, of rest, of family. It would have deep roots, both in the soil of Lot 74 and in the story of how I had fought to keep it mine. The fine was huge, the humiliation public, the defeat total. For Brenda, it was a harsh lesson in boundaries and consequences. For me, it was a stressful, unwanted education in property rights and the art of standing up to a bully. But as I sat there, under the vast, silent canopy of the night sky, a profound sense of calm settled over me. The war was over. The peace had been reclaimed. And my sanctuary was, at last, truly and completely my own.